In July of 2004, a group of community volunteers from Niagara-on-the-Lake, Ontario, came together with their camcorders and spent some time videotaping the people, places, and happenings of the Niagara-on-the-Lake region. They came back with some fascinating pictures and wonderful stories. This is Our Town, Niagara-on-the-Lake. Broadcast of Our Town, Niagara-on-the-Lake is made possible by the generous support of HSBC, the world's local bank, proud sponsor of the Shaw Festival. And
the Shaw Festival in Niagara-on-the-Lake welcomes you to a world of great theater by a remarkable company of actors, directors, and designers. It's no wonder that the Shaw has earned an international reputation as one of the finest theater companies in the world.
The Furniture Gallery beside QEW in St. Catharines at the Garden City Skyway. Furnishing and design leaders in our town and your home. FurnitureGallery.com. 800-680-5553.
And by the members of WNED. Thank you.
My name's Susan FERRIER MACKAY, and I shot Horse and Buggies in Niagara-on-the-Lake. When you think of Niagara-on-the-Lake, horse and buggies is one of the things that comes to mind. They're just a charming part of the town. I think it's the best way to see the city. It's slow, it's really gentle and just charming and relaxing. It's a good way to get around and see the town and get a feel for it, and also feel like you're traveling back into the past a little bit.
Well, the horse and carriages add sort of the old atmosphere of the town. Since the town reflects the period in the 1800s, the horse and carriages fit right into the mode of transportation.
The drivers will tell you information about the town. So they can act as kind of a guide. So they're very helpful and very nice, very friendly. In Niagara-on-the-Lake, there are 2 companies, and altogether, I believe there are 5 carriages. They rotate the horses. They have more horses than they have carriages, so they take turns so the horses don't get overworked. When I was riding along, we went down by the lake and saw the gazebo, which is very much a part of Niagara-on-the-Lake. And then we continued along that road and past some of the really old houses and past the Oban Inn, which is a very popular spot. And then we came back up the main street and, of course, past the clock tower. They're very romantic. It's very popular for men to propose to their girlfriends. One of the owners told me a story about a young man who had actually rented a knight outfit, like armor, to propose, and luckily she said yes. When you think of Niagara-on-the-Lake, that's one of those images that you have, the horse and buggies going down the main street.
My name is Megan KULCHER, and I filmed the scenic parts of Niagara-on-the-Lake. Queen Street's the main street in Niagara-on-the-Lake. It's where all the local shops are, and bakeries and ice cream shops. The main tourist section of Niagara-on-the-Lake. In the morning, at 7 in the morning or early, it's not busy at all. It's completely dead almost. Just basically the workers. To stroll down early in the morning, it's really peaceful. Some locals go for walks early in the morning, just because it is really nice and quiet, and you get a real nice sense of the town. And later on, after 10 or 11, it gets really busy. Really busy. The streets are crowded. My favorite would have to be the clock tower. Shot it in the morning, so the sun was just coming up. It's beautiful during the night, during the day, all times, especially when it's like lit up and stuff at night. It's really nice. There's an amphitheater that a lot of the bands play at. It's a place where a lot of people have picnics, and families just get together and play down there. I was walking on the way to Fort George, and I went down the bike path, and there is on top of a hill, and you can look across and you can see the marina with all the boats set up. The gazebo is right near Front Street. It's right along the waterfront. So if you drive down there, you can go out onto the gazebo and look across the lake, across where all the boats are, and there's people fishing and there's sailboats, and then if you look farther across, that's where Fort Niagara is. Niagara-on-the-Lake is a really special place to live because everyone knows each other and the community is really close. We don't really have many problems here, and it's just really a nice, peaceful place.
My name is Jim Smith. I've taken some videos of some of the most interesting parts of the main street, Queen Street. The apothecary was established in 1820 and ran continuously until 1974, so it was the longest continuously running apothecary or pharmacy in Canada. You're going back in time, the old jars and the old feeling, the old display cases, the woodwork, the smell, they're all things that I love, and they're all things that I grew up with. And it's a very tranquil feeling. The clock tower was notorious for not keeping time, and it had an old mechanism that was battery operated. So what I did is I converted it from battery to modern timekeeping devices. I shot the pictures of the courthouse, including the belfry, which houses the bell that you hear ringing for the clock tower. And that bell dates from 1827. The clock tower is really the cenotaph because it's a war memorial built for the soldiers that died in the First World War, and then later the Second World War names were added, and also the Korean War. In the 60s, every friend that I ever sat with and talked with at a coffee shop, "You're not going to stay in this town, are you? You got to get out of here." I mean, this place was dead. There was nothing here. You could shoot a cannon down the main street and hit nothing. The Shaw Theatre is what put it on the map. And what that has done is made people fix up their properties, beautified the town. We have beautiful flowers on the main street where you'd never ever seen flowers in town before. Niagara is special and important to me because it has so many beautiful and interesting places. The trees, the water, the people. And because my dad built our home here, you know, that I grew up here, I never ever wanted to leave.
My name is SUZANNE Bear. I've lived in Niagara-on-the-Lake now for about 3 years, just about 3 years. We shot the Shaw Festival in Niagara-on-the-Lake. It's one of the largest repertory theater in North America, which produces plays basically from the beginning of April every year to the beginning of December. This year, for example, there's 12 plays being shown in repertory throughout the season, attracting hundreds of thousands of tourists to the region, in fact, from Ontario certainly, but a lot of it, about 40% of the patrons comes from the US. The Shaw Festival has basically 3 theaters, 2 smaller ones, the Courthouse and the Royal George Theatre, and the larger theatre, the flagship theatre, called the Festival. The Guild, the Shaw Guild, which is the group of volunteers, take tickets at each one of the week performances. There's groups of volunteers that clean up and garden every Monday morning in the rather extensive gardens. There's a group of us that run tours for groups.
These doors open up, and so the sets can go through and onto the stage.
The new production center is, in fact, a new building. What it will allow the Shaw to do is basically expand their production capacities. Niagara-on-the-Lake is special because it's a small town. It's a beautiful small town, but it is a small town with a small town atmosphere. But the Shaw Theatre basically brings services and a cultural life that is way beyond what normal small towns have.
My name is Larry Cooper.
And I'm Horace Randall, and our subject matter is music primarily. And we are featuring the Niagara International Chamber Music Festival.
The Chamber Music Festival is in its 6th year now, and it's a very intense 3 weeks plus of concerts every day.
Concerts are performed at various churches within town and some other historic sites. St. Mark's Anglican Church was the first location of a concert, and St. Vincent de Paul Roman Catholic Church is another, and also Grace United. And then there are some historic sites which are being used as well, the courthouse and also the museum. The attendance has increased, and we certainly look forward to even more exciting things in the future.
The artistic director, who's the man whose vision all of this is, his name is Atis Bankas. He's a violinist with the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. He knew of the area. He decided that this would be a good thing to do.
I chose Niagara simply because Niagara was the best Ontario could offer, in my judgment, because of the natural beauty, wineries, and culture that Shaw Festival has established through many, many years. So I founded the festival, Chamber Music Festival. That was a natural choice, and never regretted ever since.
It broadens the whole cultural aspect. There's nowhere else that you can hear this kind of music in town. I'm really just bowled over that it's taken off to the extent that it has here.
My name is Stan Harrington, and I've shot a video of the historical district of Niagara-on-the-Lake, and we call it the Heritage District, or the Old Town, and it comprises of about a 5-block area, and most of that is the commercial area, and there's approximately 110 shops and services. It is a living, working historic community, so we live here. We also work here. Here in the Old Town, there's probably, in the busy season, up to 3,000 people that work in commercial establishments here in the Old Town. We have hardly any chains here. A lot of the stores are mom and pop stores owned by families, and they're run by families. And it makes the shopping experience better. And plus, it's a great place to live, and the people are friendly and have a lot of civic pride in their business. And you see them in the morning, they're out sweeping the sidewalk or putting out their garbage. They help the town employees with the cleanup if necessary. Everything you want really is within the Old Town. I can have meals anywhere from a $3.99 breakfast to a $150 meal. If I want to go to a world-class play, I walk across the street from my store. And I can go to a world-class play. I think it's like when people say, I live in New York, I like the atmosphere. It's the same here. We know in the summer that we'll be busy, and it's a great atmosphere, I think. The stores themselves, most of them, are old. They're not a facade. They are real history. We work in the concept of retaining our history and our backgrounds, where we came from. It's a special thing you have to maintain. And if you're a business person, you have to, I believe, take that in consideration.
My name is Dave Gilchrist. I've lived in town for going on 25 years. And what I've tried to do in this particular segment of the film is give you a sense of what Fort George is like through filming the fife and drum muster. It's quite an exciting event for townsfolk as well as visitors. It's comprised of youth from the surrounding area who are volunteers, and they've become kind of unofficial ambassadors for the town because they're often asked to play at special events and when dignitaries come to town. Each group gives demonstrations throughout the day for visitors. During the day, there's the big fife and drum parade in the center of the fort. And in the evening, there's the demonstration of the musketry and the cannon. It really gives you a sense of what it would have been like fighting back in 1812 period. The demonstrations are quite realistic, and they leave the visitor with a kind of a awe-inspiring feeling. It's important to show what goes on at the fort for visitors as part of the living history within the town. Fort George, I find, for my family, has become like a jewel in that activity.
My name is Simon Earl, and I chose the subject of the Niagara-on-the-Lake golf course and Fort Mississauga, which lies inside the golf course. The local claims are that it's the oldest golf course in North America. The one golf course that has remained in basically in continuous use as a golf course since it started. Before it was a golf course, the fort was established during and just after the War of 1812 on Point Mississauga, right on the mouth of the Niagara River in Lake Ontario. The land was leased approximately 1875 to the golf course, and club play started that year. The green for the second hole was inside the ramparts of the fort, and to tee off, you were outside the ramparts and you shot a blind tee shot over into the second hole, which was marked by a big tall flag post that was operated by a string. And if the flag was up, that meant that the green was free, and if the flag was down, that meant there was still people on the green, don't hit, right? So, and this hole was there until about 1976, I believe. It was deemed a historical site, so none of the fort is on the golf course anymore. When you're playing a round of golf, you can look out there many days, and you got some very nice views of the lake and the skyline, and some of the local sailing clubs have regattas going on, so you can watch multitude of boats coming in, and it's just a great sight to see.
My name is Beatrice Maloney. I've been coming to Niagara-on-the-Lake all my life. I really love the town. I especially like the Christmas season. One of the favorite things I like to do is take a night walk in the town in the late evening. The town is empty of people, and in the silence, the only sound to be heard is maybe the odd car passing and the town clock striking the hour. The stores are beautifully decorated. There's a warm glow from each store that warms the night air. It's a beautiful, beautiful sight. A few nights later, the candlelight stroll begins. Thousands of people will gather in front of the courthouse.
Of Niagara-on-the-Lake.
On each street corner, carolers are singing. It's very impressive when you see all these people in the darkness of the night walking down holding candles. Children, the babies in carriages, even they bring the family pets. Everyone enjoys it. The Santa Claus Parade is an annual event. Actually, for a small town, it really is a great parade. They have wonderful floats, sponsored by the local wineries, the hotels, the Bed and Breakfast Association, local churches and schools. And when it's all over, later in the evening, again, the town is silent again. You'd never know anyone was there.
My name is Trevor GOUGH, and I basically shot some what I thought were some very dramatic scenes of wine country. It was something I decided to do that day. I was driving home in the car. I looked up in the sky and I thought, wow, that would make a beautiful shot. It's beautiful country. We're known for our Niagara wines here. There's vineyards for hundreds and hundreds of miles. It seems like they go on forever, and it's just beautiful. That's relatively new technology in the wine business. In spring, early crops are hugely affected by frost. It will actually kill them, and you can lose a whole crop. So the farmers have a very large telephone pole, and it has 3 thermometers on it, one at a very high level, one at a medium level, and one at ground level. And when the temperature drops significantly, it phones the farmer and tells him to turn these on. And it can actually change the temperature quite quickly by like 4 degrees in the vineyard and save the grapes. The town tends to be quite historic and preserved, which is really, really nice. But it's very touristy as well. When you get off the beaten trail, there's so many other beautiful things to appreciate. If you come to Niagara-on-the-Lake, I basically wanted it to be known that don't stick to Queen Street. There's a heck of a lot more out there than Queen Street.
My name is HARRO MASKOW. I'm a volunteer for WNED, shooting some material and participating in a project called Our Town, Niagara-on-the-Lake. One day I took a trip down to Queen's Royal Park, and there on the beach I saw a mother teaching her little girl how to make mud pies. And I was enchanted by this little scene, and it gave me an idea, and the idea was Nancy Potato. Now, who is Nancy Potato? Nancy Potato is the central character in several productions of Theatre Beyond Words called The Adventures of the Potato People. The actors wear very large masks, white masks of various shapes and sizes. The masks have noses, eyes, wigs, but no mouths. And they don't need any mouths because the plays are non-verbal. It's really all seen through the eyes of the little main character, which is this famous Nancy Potato. A very naive character, a character which absorbs constantly what's going on around her and reacts on it. What kind of enchanted me was this kind of absurdity of theater character taken from a production suddenly in a real environment, on that real beach, but nobody else around. We are a touring company, and the tours bring us across Canada, really coast to coast. Plays are non-verbal. There are no language barriers. And so we have done an amazing amount of touring around the Pacific Rim and also into Europe, Soviet Union 3 times, the former Soviet Union. Theatre Beyond Woods was founded back in 1977 when we did our first Potato People play, and I remember we did it to kindergarten kids. Those kids now have grown up into adults. They're coming to our shows and bringing their kids now to our shows. It is as appealing to the little kids that watch it as to their parents, their teachers, the adults, because they look at the place with different eyes.
My name's Caleb Schriefer.
And I'm Kirk Schriefer. I'm Caleb's dad. And together we shot a lot of footage of local hangouts here in the tourist town of Niagara-on-the-Lake. I did the adult perspective, and Caleb did a youth perspective. Around here, being a tourist town, so the main drag here, Queen Street, is always shoulder to shoulder on good days, right, of tourists. So a little bit off the beaten track would be someplace like the Commons ground, which is sort of a historical place where the butler's barracks and everything is, but it's a big wide open space surrounded by trees and a walkway. And so locals will go there to be alone or isolated from all the busyness of Queen Street. One of the other local hangouts for the adults is to go into the Anchorage Inn, which is down by the waterfront. And it's got a bit of history there. That's where the guys that invented Trivial Pursuit hung out years and years ago, you know. And so it's got kind of a real local feel to it where all the locals go to hang out and, you know, get a cheap beer and listen to some, you know, good music sort of thing.
The kids hang out behind the Niagara Arena and skate park, which was built a couple years ago by local aldermen and some business people and local residents. Kids from age 10 to 25 go there to hang out, practice skateboarding, rollerblading, scooters, just to meet up with friends. Also inside the Niagara Arena was the lacrosse season is taking place now in summer, and almost every kid in Niagara-on-the-Lake here is playing lacrosse. Every kid also joins a softball league during the summer and plays softball on Saturday afternoons.
The Pie Plate is kind of an unusual place because it's a bit off the beaten track over in Virgil there, which is a part of Niagara-on-the-Lake. And it's a little bakery cafe place that uses all the local fruit from around town. They don't bring anything in from outside, you know. It's not frozen, shipped in, or no mixes or stuff. The owner does everything from scratch. The bakers are out there peeling peaches, you know, out the back door like your grandma would at your farm. It's just where people like to come to sit and read a newspaper, bring their family and their kids and sit around the table, hang out for a bit. One of the other nice places, even though it's close to Queen Street here, is the Angel Inn, which is the oldest pub in North America. Like, it was built way back before the War of 1812, and then it was burned down to the ground by the Americans when you know, that little skirmish was going badly for them. They were leaving town and they decided to burn it. So then they rebuilt it after that, and it's been there ever since. The locals just like to go there and chat it up, politics, sports, what's going on around town, you know, and that's one of the really cool things about this Angel Inn pub. We had moved to LA for a while, but moved back up here in '87, and, you know, we've been here ever since '87. When I first moved here, it was like they rolled up the sidewalks and went to bed at 8 o'clock, right? I came from this 24-hour town. But I got used to it and realized the little dead-end street we live on is it's great for raising kids and raising a family, and if it didn't snow here, it'd be perfect.
My name's Ray Pettit, and what I've shot is the
Niagara-on-the-Lake Lawn Bowling Club. We're in our 127th year, and it's supposedly one of the oldest clubs still in existence in Canada. Lawn bowling is played on a very flat green. Number of players can be either from a pair up to 4 players on a team. The object of the game is to get your bowls closest to the jack, which is the little white ball that we place approximately 80 odd feet away. It's quite skillful. You have to contend with the grass. The grass isn't like a hole where it's completely flat. The bowls are actually weighted on one side. That allows them to curve, and by curving you can come in either around bowls that are already there or against somebody else's and knock them out the way. We have approximately 70 members. We do play other clubs. We go to visit other clubs, and other clubs come to visit us. When you're visiting or another club's visiting you, you wear whites, and that's going back to an old British tradition. We would play one game, and then we would have a tea break and a social get-together, and then we will draw teams again and play another game. Many visitors that visit the town, we have a gate open and they wander in, and they really do think they're in another world. They can't believe that this is tranquility in half a block from the main street. It's like a different world.
My name is Gail Davidson, and I've lived in the Niagara region my whole life, specifically in Niagara-on-the-Lake for the last 6 years. I did the sailing communities in Niagara-on-the-Lake. There's 2 specific communities here. There's the Niagara-on-the-Lake Sail Club and there's Smuggler's Cove Boat Club. Back in the early 1800s, there was the Niagara Harbor and Dock Company, I believe, and they actually provided service for vessels that were coming into Lake Ontario, into the mouth of the Niagara River. And that actual building from 1834 is now used as the clubhouse for the Niagara-on-the-Lake Sail Club. The original post and beam building still stands, and they use it for their yacht club there. It's beautiful. It's right at the mouth of the Niagara River. You can see Youngstown, New York, and Fort Niagara from the docks there. Smuggler's Cove is another boat club. It's not called a sail club, but it's called a boat club because they also have motor boats. It's very unique. It's about 2 miles down the Niagara River, and it's an actual floating club, so it's very rare. And I've always said it's a little piece of paradise because you can't see it from the land, but if you come in by the water, you can see it, and it's floating there in the Niagara River. My husband and I have always called the Niagara River the emerald jewel. It is an absolutely gorgeous color of green when you're traveling down by sailboat. It's beautiful. That's what drew us to this area, that we have one of the most beautiful areas in the world. Makes it very special for us. I love the freedom of sailing, of being on the water, because it's so quiet. When you turn the motor off, once you get out into the water, and you put the sails up, and all you hear is the water lapping on the side of the boat and the wind in the sails. It's just a beautiful feeling of freedom.
My name's Peter Richmond. I've been a resident of Niagara-on-the-Lake for the last 7 years. I shot the Niagara District Airport, and it's situated on Highway 55, a few minutes from the main highway, the Queen Elizabeth Way, which transports you either to Toronto or to dear old Buffalo. I've always had an interest in aviation, and I wanted to show to the local residents that this is not a Mickey Mouse airport. This is a vibrant, successful, efficiently run, quite busy airport with approximately 55,000 aircraft movements in a year. For helicopter flight, I used Skyway helicopters, and if you've never been in one before, of course, it's a wonderful experience, almost vertical takeoff. And then he proceeded down the Niagara River, beautiful aerial shots of the falls, and it was quite an experience. The second flight was with the other major aerial tour company called Niagara Air Tours, who fly fixed high-wing Cessna aircraft, and they also fly over Niagara-on-the-Lake, over Fort Niagara. That was first for me. That was wonderful. The next flight was arranged through the airport manager, a man called Conrad Hatcher, who was most cooperative to me, and that was through the St. Catharines Flying Club. The Flying Club is most active and takes part in the training of student pilots, a rather large ground school. They also, you can charter them for trips to the falls or aerial photography, film work, many different kinds of flights. I had a wonderful time. It was just the magic of being a bird for a short while.
My name is Howard Cudlitz.
And I'm Yolanta Yani. We were shooting bed and breakfasts in Niagara-on-the-Lake. There is about 300 bed and breakfasts in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and we felt that it's a pretty important part of our community life. We thought there's so many people coming to Niagara-on-the-Lake, visiting all these beautiful bed and breakfasts. We thought we show them what do we have to do for them to enjoy this day. We like to buy fresh goods from the farms and from the stores daily because we want to give them the best.
It's getting up at 6:30 in the morning and putting the baked goods into the oven, getting the smell through the house, putting the coffee on, setting the table, preparing the breakfast.
And whenever everything is ready, I come around 7 o'clock and I do the core cooking, because Harry is my prep cook, I call him. And then we serve the breakfast, and after breakfast we sit down with people for a while to just chit-chat.
And the conversation just goes on, and these are people that just meet each other, and they're having such great conversation, and it goes on for an hour and a half sometimes.
We used to travel a lot in the summer. Now we can't because we sit and expect our guests. But I'm saying, as we were going to visit all different parts of the world, now the world is coming to our house. We work hard, but it's not a hard work, because if you love what you are doing, it's actually fun. It's not a work. And we love what we are doing.
That's right.
We do.
My name is Betty Culinary. I've lived here for over 20 years, and I decided to shoot the beautiful wineries of Niagara-on-the-Lake. I started with Pelletieri Estate Winery, and it's a family-run winery. I've managed to see the bottling process. It was quite fascinating. Right from the beginning, when they open the box with the bottles, they put them on the line, they get cleaned, filled, corked, labeled, and boxed again for shipping it out. Their cellar is just beautiful. The way the barrels are placed, the way they're cradled with the wood in between them, and they're just very well cared for. You can see that. I visited the Konzelmann winery, and that's bringing the German influence. Because he's on the lake view, it has a little different temperature, and it gives a different essence to the grapes that he harvests. He has one section just for Ice Wine Awards, and then there's another case full of the other awards he's won. I visited the winery Chateau de Charmes. There's a long drive going right up to the chateau itself, which is a beautiful view in itself. When you come to the front entrance, you open the doors, and there's this massive staircase leading up to the office areas and a banquet area as well. But the outside is also breathtaking because they have a patio, and you see the entire vineyard. They have also many varieties. They have the French hybrids as well. They have the Chardonnay, the Pinot Noir, the Vinifera. They have a wine tasting bar, and you're able to taste whatever you prefer, and they also give you some knowledge about what you're tasting. So they give you a background on the process that for growing it, processing it, and how it's come to be to get to the point where it's actually in the bottle. They've won many awards, gold medals, world-renowned for all types of wines as well as their ice wine. I visited Pellar Estates, and that has the Hungarian influence. There's a beautiful oak wine tasting room. There's a beautiful dining room, and that's unique in itself because the other wineries have a wine tasting area, but this one has an actual dining room. They had all types of corkscrews that you could possibly imagine. It was interesting because usually you think a corkscrew is just a corkscrew, but they had very many different varieties, and they explained exactly what each one did, so it was interesting to see that. Enniskillen Wines is actually the first winery in Niagara-on-the-Lake. They're the official sponsor to the Canadian Olympic team. They have a barn there called the Bray Barn. From 1920 is when this Bray Barn was actually constructed. It's a very distinguished winery. It was actually the first winery. They were the first to apply for a wine license, and so they are the first winery in Niagara-on-the-Lake. They each bring their own little uniqueness to the winemaking industry. It's not just wine, it's tradition, it's heritage, it's the respect for the land, and it's definitely something to be very proud of here.
My name is Charlotte Letkeman. I live in Niagara-on-the-Lake and actually was born in the old cottage hospital on the main street of Niagara-on-the-Lake. The area that I focused on was the tender fruit industry east of the Welland Canal. That area between the four little villages that make up Niagara-on-the-Lake, the old town of Niagara-on-the-Lake, Queenston, St. David's, and Virgil. I tried to capture some of the new methods of harvesting cherries that were not in existence when I was a kid on the farm. As the cherries are brought in tanks of cold water, they're actually chilled even more because chilled cherries will pit well. From these tanks of cold water, the cherries are put into a dumper and then put through a machine where the stems are shaken off, and then the very large cherries are sorted out. They will go to juice. They then go through an area where they have 7 electronic eyes that, by using laser, they separate out cherries that are very dark, which could have a bad spot, a bruise on them, and be damaged, or very light cherries that would be too green to be processed. By the time it goes past another 8 workers or so that continue to sort and remove any that are not appropriate, the cherries are in pretty good shape. And eventually they're led to the area where they're dumped into pails. Sugar added, lids put on, and it's over. And then I went to a peach farm, a very large peach operation. Peaches and nectarines are just coming on board now. It's amazing how quickly they work and how efficiently this whole operation is done. There are so few areas where tender fruit can be grown, where the conditions are right, the climate is right, the soil is right, and we have it here. And I think I'm close to it because I was part of this as a youngster, and I would hate to see it disappear. It's just so special.
I'm Ann Lindsay.
I'm Donald Combe. We're members of the Archives Committee of St. Mark's Church, and we shot photographs in the cemetery of St. Mark's and a couple of memorial stones inside the church. St. Mark's was founded in 1792 when several members of the town requested that a rector be sent to Niagara.
They managed very nicely to erect the church and from local stone. And until the War of 1812, they were a prospering parish. The British took over the church at the beginning of the war and used it as a storage facility. It was then taken by the Americans and used as a hospital and a holding place. And then after the burning of the town in 1813, the British took the church back again. The church was reconstructed after the 1813 incident.
Probably most importantly from our perspective is the memorial stone to Leonard Blank, who died in 1782, which is 10 years before the arrival of the rector. So we know that the cemetery of St. Mark's was used at least for 10 years prior to the arrival of the rector and the building of the church. Each one of the 2,000 plus people who are buried there has a story.
One of my favorite sites is that of Katerina Pafford, who was sold into slavery in Greece as a child. Somewhere along the line, an Englishman bought her and had her educated. She married the mayor of Niagara.
For me, the single most important stone in the cemetery is the stone to Elizabeth Kerr. Her aunt was Molly Brant, a very powerful Indian princess who was the daughter of Sir William Johnson. The chopping block is probably the most widely known monument in the cemetery. There are large marks on the stone which have been created by cleavers or some very sharp instruments. During the War of 1812, when the Americans were in charge of the church building, the soldiers used the chopping block to cut up their meat. If we don't have some good grasp of our history, we don't really know where we have come from, let alone where we're going. It's only by perpetuating the story orally that we keep it alive.
My name is Paul Shepard, and as a permanent resident, I'm a newcomer, but I've been a weekender for roughly 30 years since my in-laws retired to Niagara-on-the-Lake back in the early 70s. I've got interested in the history of the town through the Historic Sites Alliance, which is a sort of a coming together of 14 different sites to make them better known to the tourists and to people who live in the town as well. We focused for this exercise on Fort George and Brock's Monument up in Queenston, which are probably the two most well-known and most prominent of the sites that we include. Niagara-on-the-Lake was important in feeding the forts in the upper lakes and the complex of Navy Hall. Navy Hall still exists below Fort George. So the fort itself was built in protection of those buildings, perhaps in anticipation of the war that was to come. Fort George has always been a favorite of mine just because of its siting and the peacefulness of it, particularly in the early morning and the late evening as you walk around, which I guess belies the violence that went on around it during the War of 1812. Basically, we just tried to give an image of the fort, the different types of fortification of the ramparts and the palisades, the moat, and the separated octagonal blockhouse, for example, which is removed slightly from the fort itself. A blockhouse is the main area of defense with gun slots and space for the garrison to be housed. The magazine is a smaller building where, in fact, the munitions were kept. So it's separate from the wooden buildings of the fort, set down in a slight hollow, obviously for protection against being burned. Fort Niagara is well visible from Fort George, and in fact, there was firing across, apparently, between the forts. Brock was the general of the British forces at the time of the War of 1812, but was killed early in the war in the Battle of Queenston as the American forces advanced across the Niagara River. And it was in trying to take back the embattlements at Queenston that he was killed. It's a monument of about 185 feet high. The escarpment there is about 360 feet. So Brock's Monument is important to the community because you just see it from everywhere, all across this flat land of the vineyards and the fruit farms, that you can see it from miles away. So it has a true prominence in the community. The history of the region is important to us as far as maintaining a continuity and also giving us a sense of place.
My name's Ewan Sharp, and I shot a segment called The Ghosts of Niagara-on-the-Lake. For every 100 residents of Niagara-on-the-Lake, there's one ghost. It's a good place to come if you want to find some, paranormal activity. Fort George is very interesting because not only are there great, stories of the battles that took place and how they defended the fort and things like that, but there's also great stories of the people who used to live there and how they continue to live there in another sense. There's one particular room in the officers' quarters in Fort George that is apparently haunted by a lady who is stuck in the mirror. People have seen her move around within the mirror, so it's definitely a sighting. In the soldiers' barracks, there are married quarters. I mean, you did have couples that lived there with children. They were born there, they grew up there, some of them died there. One of the names that I was interested in was a little girl by the name of Sarah Ann, who is said to have been seen haunting the soldiers' barracks. She was a little girl who lived there. Her father was a soldier. A lot of the ghosts have repeatedly haunted that area because it was they ended their lives in a very traumatic way there. There's an old story that goes with the Angel Inn. During the Battle of 1812, as the British were sort of advancing back in, the Americans were retreating. And there's a captain by the name of Captain Swayze who was there. And he was sort of falling back with his comrades, American comrades. And he decided that he was going to try and take refuge and hide in the basement of this old inn, the Angel Inn. So he got discovered and was actually killed in the basement of the Angel Inn. His ghost still haunts that area in the basement, but he has been seen roaming around different parts of the hotel. Pillar and Post is particularly interesting because there's two rooms, apparently, that are there that are quite haunted. And guests who've stayed there have either had minor disturbances, like radios turning on when they shouldn't, things like that, to sheets fly off the bed. The Oban Inn is Captain Mallory has apparently been heard stomping around there. He stayed at the inn. It was a favorite place of his back in the early 1800s. I did visit Butler's cemetery, and that's of Captain John Butler. He was captain of Butler's Rangers, which was some of the most ferocious of the British soldiers that battled the Americans. Apparently their grave sites are some of the most active. A lot of them died painful deaths, so I guess their spirits were restless. Everybody wants a good ghost story. Everybody wants to find out what's the anguish, what's the pain that keeps people attached to a particular spot. And there's, so many stories that all resulted in these spirits that are still here.
I'm Ron Dale. I'm I'm a resident of Niagara-on-the-Lake, but I'm also the superintendent of Niagara National Historic Sites of Canada. So my job is in history. Military history is such a closely woven part of the story of Niagara-on-the-Lake. This country during the War of 1812 was invaded by the United States. Were successful in defending Ontario and preventing it from becoming another state of the Union. So we're talking about battlefields of the period. We're really talking about the corridor that stretches along the Niagara River. So the battlefields tend to be close to the river in the old town of Niagara-on-the-Lake and in Queenston. I went to Queenston Heights, shot some of the vistas that you get from the escarpment down the Niagara River, showing, I think, how close the two countries are together geographically and what a precarious border it was when the countries were at war. We talk about our wonderful wineries and the Shaw Festival and the shopping opportunities and the beautiful town and that sort of thing. But it's worthwhile, I think, for people to realize that at one time this was a hotly contested battlefield. This was the front line. The peace, and the serenity, and the beauty that we enjoy today, that's something that was forged, really, in the fires of the War of 1812. Something that can be forgotten and shouldn't be forgotten. And I think that's important to remember.
I'm Audrey Epp, and I filmed the river, the Niagara River, Lake Ontario, and all the parks surrounding it. I filmed them just because pretty much that's what I feel I enjoy most about Niagara, is all the lake, the river, and all the parks, and that's what I use most. And I just thought they looked so nice that they should be filmed. I spent a lot of time in Queenston. I enjoyed that area a lot. There's lots of nice areas because the river is so low and the banks are so high. So from where the falls have receded, the area is just so interesting, and it's along the escarpment as well, so you have so many more trees and plants and lots of rocks and different sort of formations. Queenston Heights Park, it's on top of the escarpment, and you get a view of the whole river kind of snaking out. The conservation area is along Lake Ontario, and it's really nice. It has some high banks and then some low banks. You get to see all the birds that live along the banks and all the old trees. If you continue going, if you go through the paths, there's lagoons, and it just kind of mirrors the lake off to both sides, and sometimes they connect, depending on the weather. So it's a really nice area. The best thing for me in this area would probably be the landscapes, the parks, the river, and the lake. It's just so nice because it's so close to everything and you would never expect it to be there. And there's nice sort of spots where there isn't really any tourists or any people, just little havens.
Broadcast of our town, Niagara-on-the-Lake, is made possible by the generous support of HSBC, the world's local bank, proud sponsor of the Shaw Festival. And
the Shaw Festival in Niagara-on-the-Lake welcomes you to a world of great theater by a remarkable company of actors, directors, and designers. It's no wonder that the Shaw has earned an international reputation as one of the finest theater companies in the world.
The Furniture Gallery beside QEW in St. Catharines at the Garden City Skyway. Furnishing and design leaders in our town and your home. FurnitureGallery.com. 800-680-5553.
and by the members of WNED. Thank you.